All right, welcome in to the Doomer Optimism podcast. This is Tornado Nate here with Ashley, and today we are interviewing the great Greg Gunthorp. Um, Greg is a rural Indiana farmer, and so this kind of goes with my theme of Nate interviewing Midwestern farmers that he wants to emulate. So we will learn about Greg's operation, I think dip into a lot of other issues as well. Welcome, Greg.
Welcome, Nate. It's an honor to be on.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation. Like one of the great things about when I get to, host is picking people's brains and just learning because I am, farming cattle and very much in the learning stage. So I love this opportunity to pick people's brains about, what they're doing, what works, what hasn't. And I think we'll get into a lot of food system issues today too, because that seems like a real source of common issues and an important thing to talk about. But to start with, my understanding, just from following you on Twitter, is that your operation is largely sheep and pig, and maybe that's true. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing there in, you said, Northeast Indiana?
Sure. Yeah, let me give you the short version of our story. I grew up on the next road over. My family still owns the land. My dad and brother still farm that. But I grew up on a diversified crop and livestock farm. We raised pastured pigs, finished some cattle, whole host of crops: corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, and through the years when there was still a lot of independent family farms, went off to, and we should talk about this later, went off on a trip with the FFA and the Young Farmers of the United Kingdom to England after I graduated, spent the summer over there for 3 months, stayed on 11 different family farms, two of which were making their living in 1988 direct marketing. I thought it was absolutely crazy, nuts. I sent a letter home to mom to tell her that even. She probably still has the letter. But went off to the land grant university, got a degree in agricultural economics, come back home, knew I wanted to raise pigs for the rest of my life. Shortly after that, in 94, dad said that the hog market for the small independent guy was done. I said I didn't want to quit raising pigs. So we ended up buying my parents' sow herd, and my wife and I went off on our own and selling and raising pigs raised on pasture, but selling them into the commodity market. It was actually a decent living until 1997. In 1998, I found out my dad was right. The hog market crashed. There was no longer a market for the small independent in the commodity. We lost every bit of equity that we had gained and sold live pigs for less than what my grandpa sold them for in the Depression. We netted as low as 5 cents a pound. I still said I didn't want to quit. I thought back of that summer I spent in England. You could just start to pick up the newspapers and see that guys like Bill Nyman out on the West Coast was selling to Alice Waters at Chaponese. Guys like John Jameson on the East Coast was starting to sell to the Watergate and a few places into New York. You could see it in a few of the magazines and the newspapers. And I told my wife, this is going to happen in the United States. It's never going to get as big as Europe, but it's going to happen. And we're going to make a living getting our pigs processed and sending them to chefs in Chicago. My wife and my sister, the only people on the planet in 1998, didn't think I was absolutely nuts. But we did it anyways. Our financial situation actually got worse for a while, which I don't know how it could have got much worse. But we sent my youngest daughter, or my oldest daughter, when she was in kindergarten, we sent her for a field trip with change to pay for a field trip. Used cash to pay for kerosene to keep brooders lit or warm when we couldn't pay the propane bill. But the whole thing gained some traction, and we got some momentum. And had we filled out the paperwork in 2011, we would have been on Inc.'s 5,000 list for one of the fastest growing independent companies in the country. And so we built a USDA inspected processing plant on the farm. We raise pastured pigs. We raise some grass-fed lambs. We raise a little bit of poultry still. We used to have a sizable pastured chicken operation, but the only poultry we're doing right now is pastured turkeys, and we will get back into pastured ducks. But it's been an amazing journey. Love to talk about that. And, love to also talk about some of the advocacy work and the food system works that both you and I talk about on a regular basis.
Can I jump in real quick and ask a clarifying question? So for those people who don't know much about like agricultural history in the US or whatever, why in 1998 was there no longer a market? Like what was happening there? Maybe we could start, I tend to like to
Okay. Yep.
podcast in the direction of let's start with the doom, let's lay out how bad things are, and then we'll turn towards the optimism. So what was happening there? Yeah.
Agriculture in the United States, and for those of us that understand it out here in rural America, I guess that's a great question because it does seem obvious to us. But agriculture industrialized and consolidated. It started with the laying hens, went to the broiler chickens, the fat cattle, and then the hogs were the next thing. And, it went from a model where there were 600,000 independent family farms raising pigs in the United States to a model we have today where there's 60,000 hog farmers, where 30 farms own about 75% of the pigs, and most of the people that have hogs on their farm don't even own them. They have the manure, the mortalities, and the mortgage on the barn. So the hog industry went through a very, very rapid consolidation where guys figured out that they didn't have to just raise a few. They could stuff them in barns, get all kinds of hired help from everywhere imaginable, and feed them all kinds of antibiotics and raise shitloads, excuse my language, but bunches of pigs. And the industry went from a independent family farm model to a agriculture doesn't like it, but it's a corporate controlled, if not corporate owned, but it's definitely corporate controlled model. And it did that in the hog industry almost overnight. And when you get concentration and consolidation to the level that you have in the livestock and poultry industry, there were some mitigating factors. You got Tyson, which had just bought IBP. They bought up 2 packing plants when we were already really, really tight on having enough places to get pigs processed in the United States. They bought up Thornapple Valley in Detroit, which could process 13,000 hogs a day. They bought Huron pork in the Dakotas, which could do 6,000-7,000 a day, and they closed them. Had no intentions of running them when they knew good and well that there was already too many hogs in the country. And the hog market went from one where we personally could call and take pigs to 14 different buying stations or auctions in the morning, could know what we were getting for them, except for at the auctions, know what the price was. Overnight, it went from being able to do that to we could call 3 places and they'd tell us which date we could bring them in, but they wouldn't tell you what the price was. So the market disappeared literally overnight, and hog farmers that were small, independent, weren't big enough to get a production contract with the packers. They had no choice but to quit. They lost every bit of equity that they had, and it did it overnight. Lots of the other industries that consolidated, it was a more slow and painful death. I always argue that the guys that finished fat cattle, they didn't really know when it was over. The guys that dairy, they know it's over, but it's just a lot of small little cuts rather than one. In the hog industry, we knew when it was done. They shut the lights off and told us to go home.
Yeah, right. So in short, the industry consolidated to the point that the smaller producers just simply couldn't compete. They just couldn't get in. They couldn't process their animals. They couldn't make enough to make a living on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I'd argue that and there's a lot of that argument on Twitter, but the small and smaller becomes something that is really, really difficult to define in agriculture, because I think the last USDA survey was 14% of the hogs were actually owned and raised by independent family farms. And I'm sure it's significantly less now because of COVID. And the statistic I just threw out there was that 30 farms, and I really have a hard time calling them farms, but I mean, I guess there are 30 farms or 30 corporations, the largest of which is Smithfield, a Chinese-owned corporation. But those 30 farms own about 75% of the hogs.
Yeah.
So we went from the small independents to even the large independents no longer have a place. It's the same as the chicken industry. There are no independent chicken farmers in this country. The eggs aren't a lot better. 200 farms in this country raise 90-some% of the eggs. When you put 1 to 12 million hens on each individual farm, and you only have a hen per person in the United States, because that's about what egg consumption needs are. You can do the rough math. You got 300 and some million people, and you got a couple million hens on a farm. You only have a couple hundred farms have almost all the chickens. Pigs are getting the same way. The current scale of hog operations will have about 800 farrowing sites in the United States at 6,000 to 10,000 sows per farrowing site. You can do the rough math. This country processes 100 million and change in pigs a year. It only takes 800 farms of that scale to raise all of the pigs in the United States. That we went too far. The pendulum has went too far in that.
Yeah, I was curious about these 800 sites that you're talking about. There's so many places to drill in, but first, I guess, describe some of the problems that might be associated with a site of that scale.
You've got all kinds of hidden risks and hidden costs in an agriculture that gets to that scale. The obvious one is that you take the I states. We have a huge problem in the I states with our rivers and lakes aren't fit for people to enjoy. They're all have way too much fertilizer and manure in. And the more you concentrate manure, the more potential you have for it to end up in the wrong places. It's just a higher risk when you put lots of it in one location. You also have air quality issues. You got hydrogen sulfide, ammonia. There's several others that leave these facilities, and agriculture, because it's been independent family farms, and I'm not advocating for regulations, but agriculture, because it's been independent family farms, has always had a good rapport with the public, and has got some really, really good exemptions to all kinds of rules on the production side for the Clean Water Act, clean air issues. So there's people that live beside these. That's not just odors, but it's also potential health problems when you put that many animals together. You put that many animals together, and you're just once again creating all kinds of risks for superbugs, resistant bacteria that we see what happens when we let microbiology out into society. It's not necessarily a good thing. It takes lots of years to straighten that back out. And
well, let me add in here too to put a finer point on it, because I think that's really important. Is now you have these thousands of animals, and then we use the same antibiotics on those animals that we use on us, right? So you're creating sort of an opportunity with thousands and thousands of animals for their immune, for the bugs essentially to adapt to the very antibiotics that we depend on, right? So we are creating antibiotic resistant bacteria that's in those places for sure.
Oh, exactly. And, when you stop and think about it, the whole system is 180 degrees different than what we would do out on a regenerative farm, where, you get seasonal production, which can break disease cycles. You get UV light, which, just the sun. You get time. You get a whole host of biodiversity that you don't have. Those sites are shower-in facilities because they don't want to bring anything in there. They try to keep it sterile, but we know that trying to do things sterile with live animals, that doesn't work. So once something's in there, it's got easily spread. There's risks and disadvantages and advantages to all kinds of production systems. When you raise animals outside where they're spread out, they're social distance. Are there other? They really are. There's other challenges with that, but there are also some. Nature can either be really cool or it can be really cruel. And the best models are those where people really put some good management into it and then cooperate with nature. And these 6,000 to 10,000 sow facilities where the animals never get to express any of their natural instincts, never see the dirt, never see sunshine. It's not right, first of all. But it's so, like I said, 180 degrees different than what you and I would think about when we think of how we're going to cooperate with nature to produce something that's healthy and as nutritious as possible.
Yeah, that's a great frame, cooperating with nature versus, I think that the model that is being used in agriculture now is like really, competing with nature. It's sort of trying to wrest, control from nature, and talking about cooperative relationship with it, I think is important. A couple of other things I wanted to unpack with that. You said at the end, and as a person who sounds like you've loved pigs your whole life, and I think you mentioned at the end, but one of the hugest things with these hog farms is the issues of animal welfare. I wanted to say a little bit more about that because I think it's tremendously disturbing.
Well, I think if everyone got to see behind the curtain on the production side and the processing side, I've got some friends in the meat business that tell me that you don't want people to see that. And I'm like, I actually think I do. I think people would eat less meat, but I think that they would respect it a lot more. I think no matter what religion, and I don't want to get too religious on this here, but I think no matter what religion that you follow, I think that, animals were put here to be used, but they weren't put here for us to just completely dominate them. And, I have problems and I get the animal rights people upset the same as I get the production people upset, because I don't think that we should ever assign human rights to an animal. They're an animal. They don't need human rights. But I do think that they have certain instincts that we should allow them to express. And a pig should be able to get to stick its nose in the ground. A pig should be able to build a nest to be able to have little ones. Pig should be able to go outside, be in the sunlight. There's certain things that it does, and we've felt that way for a long time. I think that our last animal welfare approved audit, we're number 27 for the farms that have ever signed up for animal welfare approved in the United States. I think they're on 4,000 now. But having said all that, and we've been involved in the animal welfare movement for a couple of decades. I do have to acknowledge that I don't think it's a really, really big market in the United States. People talk about it a lot, but I don't think it's the biggest selling point. We sell mostly to upscale restaurants and a few upscale retailers. And yeah, they like to know that. But I think that either the quality of your food or the nutrition of your food are the selling points of products. I don't think animal welfare is a big selling point in the United States, and it's a shame because it should be. And, as an affluent and prudent society, we ought to treat our animals better, and we ought to treat our farmers better and our farm workers better. But we don't, and I'm to the point anymore. I'm not beating my head against the wall trying to get that to be the selling point, because I don't think it is.
Yeah, I would just let me just hop in real quick. I just think on this podcast, we tend to occupy that. It seems like a niche philosophical space, even though it shouldn't be niche. It's like neither are we with the vegans who kind of want to humanize animals, are so out of touch with nature that they basically are just taking animal rights to an extreme point. Whereas if you're ever interacting with animals or have domesticated animals, you understand that there's a different kind of relationship. They're not humans. They're animals. It's a different type of species with a different, kind of instinct, like you were saying. But neither are we okay with treating animals like a cog in a factory. So it's like these two extremes seem like they're in opposition to each other, but we're like this third thing that just thinks, animals are okay to be eaten, but they're meant to be treated respectfully as animals, which I feel like was the way people thought about animals for most of human history. It's really only now that it's like these two extremes that are both pretty out of touch with like how animals actually act.
They're
Go ahead. You go ahead, Nate.
Go ahead, Greg.
No. Oh, okay.
they're extremely out of touch, but I almost feel like that today in the United States, I don't think we get to talk about that much. The conversations that are had around animals, the production, the consumption, how much we're going to consume, those are immediately yes or no questions.
Mhm.
They're never, how are we going to raise the animals?
Yeah.
How much of it are we going to consume? In what fashion are we going to consume it? None of those questions. How are we going to process it? And we need to have those discussions because this conversation is much more nuanced, and you guys are 100% spot on. This is much more nuanced than we're not going to eat animals, or we're going to raise them however the hell we want.
Yep.
I often talk about I call it the dumbest debate on the internet, the vegetarian / vegan versus meat. Like, it's the dumbest debate on the internet because it happens in this overly simplified way, and it rarely actually gets into that the meat of the issue, no pun intended.
Nice.
Because it is subtle, and it is, my wife and I were vegetarian not vegan, but we were vegetarian for 12 years. And I feel like that's a lot of the people you're talking about, Greg, who are interested in animal welfare. They're not a big market for you because those people go generally to just being vegetarian. They just stop eating meat rather than, buy humane meat. And part of that actually is sort of rational to a degree because such a huge, as you pointed out, such a huge percentage of meat is produced in this way that, if somebody abstains from that system altogether, I totally respect that,
Right.
like I fine, good. That's a great choice. But I think then you have these different production systems that we're trying to, that we are putting in place, and respecting animal welfare and ecology and trying to grow. And of course we need support to do that. I think it's a more complicated and difficult story to tell. Like, if you're a person who loves animals, it's pretty easy to just be like, yeah, don't eat animals. Like, that makes sense. You see the horrors of modern ag, you see that and you are correctly revolted by some of the extreme practices you see there. But then it's like, well, I don't eat animals, and it makes the story really simple. And but I think talking about the relationship between humans and animals, and the respect, and care sort of that's required to do it well, but also the need for the land and for people to have animals in this capacity. Like humans, eat meat, and ecology needs animals on it. Around where I'm at, you absolutely need to have animals. You need to have ruminants on the land.
Yeah, why don't we hear the Greg Gunthorp? Let's say, okay, let's do a theoretical listener, vegetarian or vegan for environmental, animal welfare reasons. Let's hear the Greg Gunthorp case for eating sustainable or regenerative meat to that potential audience member.
Oh man, that's an excellent question. And I will say that one, you guys should get my son, Evan, on the podcast sometime, because he's really good at we'll go out to events. We've been at the Outstanding in the Field events, and we've been at different dinners with some of the chefs in Chicago and all that. And he's really good about, laying out the story of what we do on the farm and convincing people. I think the longest was 12 years. Vegetarian that had some of our duck once, but I'm probably not the greatest person that doing that. My argument would be people really need to come out and see our farm. And I've told people this before, and I always just get the deer in the headlight look, so I don't think it's probably the correct argument. But I tell people, you should come out, look at our pigs, see the sows farrowing the huts out in the woods, see the little pigs running around. They have one bad day on the farm when they come up to the processing plant, and we've done 1,000 things, little things, to make it so that they don't even realize that. The holding pens are the same shelters as what they have out in the field. Their waters are the same. They never get a traumatic long ride in a truck with other pigs. So I mean, our experience is as ideal as you can get from an animal welfare standpoint. And I honestly believe that if our pigs had a choice to live their life on our farm, knowing that they were going to end up as human food or not, I think our pigs would choose to live their life. I mean, I would. And then as far as the regenerative aspect, and people could do this just by pulling up Google Earth. But if they came out and seen the farm, we need ruminants back on the land. We have about 1,000 sheep running around the farm. And what ruminants do with adaptive multi-paddock grazing, with pulse grazing, where you let the grass go up and then you take it back down, what that does for adding organic matter, sequestering carbon, increasing water infiltration, lowering runoff. Our lands were evolved to have ruminant animals on. And the idea of taking them off and just letting those go back to wild, that's the craziest notion I've ever heard. And so I probably would offend them, because I probably have to tell them that's the craziest notion I've ever heard. All you got to do is, pull up Google Earth, look at our place. We're just south of Mongo, Indiana, at the corner of State Road 3 and US 20. It doesn't take understanding regenerative certifications. It doesn't take understanding industrialized agriculture. You can pick it up with the satellite map on where our farm starts and where the, I like to call it the green desert, or the corn and soybean wasteland, where it starts, the I-states. You can pick out the regenerative farms, and we need animals to be able to do that. It's literally not possible without adaptive multi-paddock grazing. Regenerative ag needs animals integrated. Whether you consume those or not, whether you just stick with the milk products or whether you don't have any of them, I'd argue that the vegans should actually be some of our biggest supporters, and they should be arguing for regenerative agriculture of ruminant animals and true adaptive multi-paddock grazing, holistic grazing, whatever you want to call it.
So that's a great point, and obviously I'm completely on board with that. I'm curious to hear how pigs fit into this, right? Because pigs totally different. So the short version is ruminants have multiple stomachs, so they eat stuff that humans can't eat. They can, graze. A cow will go out, a sheep will go out and eat grass, eat forbs, eat browse, and they'll eat things that we can't eat. And they have multiple stomachs; they can chew, digest it over time, and take non-human food and turn it into human food. Pigs don't do that. So how do pigs fit into the regenerative scheme?
That's a great question. And I'll say, first of all, I'm a pig farmer, grew up a pig farmer. I'll always be a pig farmer. And it's in my blood, and it's what I know, and it's what I know best. But pigs, I have a hard time when people start talking about pigs and regenerative. I think that the sow herd, the gestating sow herd, could be a regenerative operation. We've actually developed a means where we run them in a leader follower system behind our sheep. So our gestating sows are foraging animals. The only feed that we take them is still a high forage diet. So, but as far as pigs and poultry both, I think the ideal situations, they need to be a component in a grass and or crop system. Growing up, our pigs were part of the rotation on a 600-acre diversified crop and livestock farm. That's the ideal place for pigs. We come up against a really, really hard wall of access to capital and access to land for people to be able to do that, because in my mind, ideally, we'd have 3-4 times as many acres, and our pigs would be part of the rotation. That would be the ideal situation. I don't have that much land, nor that much money to have that much land. Can't rent it away from, that comes back to our food system issues with the whole, we can't compete against corn and soybeans and their subsidized crop insurance and their guaranteed market and their guaranteed ethanol mandate and all that. But pigs and poultry, and I get into some arguments on Twitter on that too, because if you look at it, and I'm not sure I completely agree with the math on it, but I can understand where they're coming from. If you look at the math, they'll tell you when you start talking about industrial production, pigs and poultry, because they have a much better feed efficiency, have a lower carbon footprint. But the math's got to get really, really fuzzy. And I think what Grandpa's statement always was, figures lie and liars figure. But if you get the math just right, it can make it look like pigs and poultry are better from a climate standpoint than ruminant animals. But we never really compare ruminant animals in the ideal system where they're actually on adaptive multi-paddock grazing as a grass-fed animal. We're comparing them to a feedlot where, the cattle eat 6 pounds of feed instead of 2 or 3 pounds of feed, put a pound of gain on. Let's put them out on grass where they're sequestering carbon, they're increasing water infiltration, they're actually reducing the things that cause, climate problems. And then we're not talking apples to oranges, and cattle and sheep and ruminant animals are a lot better for the climate. And I'm a pig farmer. We raise pigs and poultry. And I think if you're going to eat pigs and poultry, that they should be pasture-raised animals. But I think that your diet probably should be ruminant-based meat. And that's hard for a pig farmer to say. But don't get me wrong. I could sit down and eat pork all day long. Everybody likes bacon. We got some hams that are aged 3 years in a cave just over here that are really, really good. A nice thick pork chop on the grill, a whole pig on the grill. I mean, pork is really, really good. And it's really, really, it's got lots of things you can do with it. Much, much better than lamb or beef in that regards. But we probably should be eating more ruminants that are on. And we should probably put some sows out on some rotational grazing. You guys should come see our sows during the grazing season. It's really, really cool. It takes them a little while to get used to it, but it's neat.
They'll eat grass. So tell me a little bit, maybe in more detail, because I'm really curious. So we get, and it kind of described a little bit of the function of ruminants, like they eat grass and then recycle those nutrients. So in any grass-based system, in any grassland, you have to have ruminants to do that. What function like with the hogs on your farm, like what function are they serving? Like how like they're eating grass, like are they putting nutrients back? Like what are they consuming? Sort of what's the ecological niche that they're that they fit in? Like where do they, because like on a big diversified farm, like those hogs are gonna, like, you're producing them for meat, but they're also, I imagine, gonna serve various functions. What kind of functions do hogs serve?
Pigs and poultry also. One of the biggest functions that they can serve is because they're monogastrics, and this is getting back to basics that you guys both know, but a ruminant is just basically a large fermenter, and you can put roughage in there and it actually creates energy and nutrients for the animal. Monogastric, the same as like our digestive system, you can't feed strictly on fiber. You just plain can't get enough energy through the animal. So pigs and poultry need some grain. And because you're bringing in some grain to feed them, either that or you're growing some, 85% of the nutrients that are in that feed go out the back end of the animal. So it's a really, really good way to bring fertility onto the farm. I'd argue that's probably one of the biggest advantages of pastured poultry is to bring fertility onto, and you also are jump starting that microbiology in the soil. There's lots of things. The one thing you have to be careful with pigs, my son likes to call it wrecking balls. We've all seen it. Pigs like to stick their nose in the ground, and if they're not moved frequently, they can be wrecking balls. And my son always points out, and he's 100% correct. There's a place for wrecking balls. You don't take wrecking balls out and tear down brand new buildings, but there's a place for wrecking balls. And so, pastured pigs and pastured poultry as a component on a larger, either grass or crop operation can play a really, really good role. Too many pigs in one small outside area, and you can have a moonscape really, really quick, and it takes a while to get that to grow back. So it's all ends up being about just like the others, management, stocking density. We have a farrowing farm that's 40 acres. I have a Facebook Live that me and my daughter did on it, but we've got it divided into 50 paddocks, rotate through those. Gives them a chance to regrow. So there's some forages in there. We were planting some mulberry trees along with it. So, but like I said, it all comes down to matching that stocking density with the amount of land. And pigs, I think, ideally really need another ruminant animal along with taking part of that stocking density so that you can keep the grass vegetative and get it established really well.
Yeah, the more I hear you talk about this, the more I think of your role as a kind of ecosystem steward, following it and noticing the densities and noticing what the land can handle and managing the different kinds of animals and their ecosystem function. And I think a lot of environmentalists just don't realize the extent to which regenerative farmers are like the frontline ecosystem stewards. Nate, I don't know if you have any other questions on the production side, but I want to get to, so Greg's talking about a different model from the industrial production model. He's talking about his regenerative production model, but I want to talk about the alternative processing model he has, the alternative distribution model, and then maybe we can talk other, subsidies and antitrust and those kind of things. But Nate, I want to give you a chance to ask production questions if you want before we move on to processing.
Oh man, I got a million, but
don't take up the whole podcast.
Right. Because I want to talk equally much about the processing. I'm super interested in that, and we need to get to the food system and the political issues as well, for sure. I guess we can end on this. I'm curious why you chose, why sheep are the ruminant of choice on your place.
We chose sheep for two reasons. First of all, I think the sheep industry, for the most part, especially if you're on the eastern United States and you're willing to sell the lighter lambs, the sheep industry is much more competitive than the cattle industry. There's still for the most part, a competitive sheep market. The second reason is that we were looking long term, thinking that we'd connect with one of the large solar companies and get a vegetation contract to be able to send our sheep off during the growing season to control grass on one of the solar sites, give us a lot more opportunities to do something with the acres here during the growing season and have the sheep getting paid to go somewhere else, which wouldn't be an option with cattle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All
You know,
right.
those
Sorry, go ahead.
one last comment to clarify that a little more. Those light 40 to 60 pound, what I like to call the Eastern lambs, those 40 to 60 pound fat lambs. If you look at the market over the last 10 years, except for one or two times, those things have almost always traded for $2.50 to $4 a pound. And those can be lambed outside and finished in the same season. So you're not taking sheep over the winter. You're not putting any grain into the things. You're not putting barns up for them, just grass. And so that, that's different than cattle. Cattle take some more infrastructure to finish cattle. You actually have, no matter what, you got to take them over a winter in the Midwest. And, and that creates some challenges that don't necessarily, and don't get me wrong, sheep have their own challenges. If anybody thinks that sheep are easy to raise, they have not raised sheep.
Okay, so let's go on to the processing. I know you spoke at the beginning about the consolidated processing. I know that that's an ongoing issue, not being able to get into processors, or, if you're a small guy, it's just the scale doesn't make sense. The regulations around processing. So talk us through like the optimism of the alternative model of processing you have in mind.
Sure. We built a USDA inspected processing plant on the farm. Will be 20 years in March. We were one of the first in that whole game to think that we needed to build, and I'm not sure that there's a few that followed, but there's not a lot that have navigated those hurdles yet. It's quite a complex challenge. It took from the time we filled out the paperwork, it took 14 months to even get USDA to come out and talk to us, not to get inspection, but to get them to come out and talk to us. And I think the technical resources are a lot better nowadays. USDA, as part of the COVID funds, just actually put a fair amount of money into that. Flower Hill and the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network direct those funds, but existing and potential processors have the opportunity to get free consulting on how to get started. But I think processing has got to the point that in the protein sector, 4 companies control almost all the processing. In beef, it's those 4 have 86%. In pigs and poultry, it's 50 to 70% that those 4 control. And my argument has always been that in a capitalistic society, you actually have to have some controls on oligopolies and monopolies if you want the producers and the small businesses to have opportunities, and you want the consumers to have true choice. We learned that 100 and plus some years ago with the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, and the Packer and Stockyards Act, that there's a reason that you need to control consolidation when you're dealing with live animals and perishable products. We put those all up on the shelf and let them gather dust. And there's still a reason. If you're going to deal with live animals and perishable product, we've seen it at the beginning of COVID. They euthanized almost 1 million hogs, and they won't tell you how many chickens because their industrial system is actually extremely productive and efficient when it all clicks. But when it doesn't, it's extremely cruel to animals, farmers. The whole system, just shows a lot of cracks. It's a lot more costly to do small scale processing, but I think it's needed as a society, and we have to have some more small scale on farm in communities because access to processing for small farmers that want to market is a really, really big challenge. I'd argue the same as a good friend of mine, Will Harris, that it's not the biggest challenge, that once you actually get stuff processed, the bigger challenge is actually figuring out a means to fit into the marketplace. I'd argue that nowadays, virtually the only legitimate, good growing market left is direct to consumer. I'd argue that the wholesale end, there's a few places to fit in, but it's that whole train is almost over. But to build processing takes a really, really good business plan because it's a capital management and labor intensive business, and nobody in their right mind would knowingly enter a business that had two of those problems, let alone three of them.
But you did it anyways.
We jumped off the cliff and we made it work. But I would argue, and I think my son and my wife and the rest of the family would 100% agree. You can do things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can do things that are both profitable and have a quality of life. And I'd argue that we did what we did, probably taken away from quality of life because we work too hard to make it work. That's a choice that a person has to make, and it was an amazing journey. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. But I'd argue that if we could fix some of the serious issues in the food system, I think that it would be a much easier challenge for people to take on, to actually build that resilient processing that is actually needed in our society without people having to just about kill themselves off to figure out how to make it work.
Right. Nate, I want to toss it to you, but I just wanted to bring up Joel Salatin had this I forget what it was called, some conference where people were sharing ideas about how they could legally, via loopholes, process their animals or sell their animals on the hoof, or they could make it part of a cooperative, or it could be like a private society with a meat locker, but you have to these kinds of outlaw, I think he's something like outlaw processing, but anyways.
Yep.
That was cute.
Him and John Moody and those guys, I've been following what they do.
I like that kind of anarchist approach to things. But Nate, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I was just gonna sort of riff on that. What you're talking about, the extremely efficient system, and just to explicitly say, that comes at the cost of fragility, is what you're saying. Like if it's super efficient, one thing breaks down, and the farmers bear a lot of that fragility, and the animals bear a lot of that fragility. The giant corporations that profit off it don't bear the fragility. The fragility is borne by people lower down the chain, or the animals themselves. But that's the cost of a system that's hyper efficient. Agriculture, I would definitely argue that agriculture shouldn't be that efficient, because efficient simply means you're extracting profit from the land as efficiently as possible. And something has to go back in. Efficiency is dependent on these externalities that harm the land and harm the farmers and harm the animals. And so you have to have some inefficiency built into agriculture, I think. You need redundancies, you need you need things that aren't perfectly efficient for abundance to actually occur. Abundance lives when there are inefficiencies. It scrounges at the edges, so I think that we're built on this economic system that really wants efficiency, and I think that's inherently at odds with what the land and the people and the animals actually need.
Oh, 100%. It's at odds with a resilient food supply. It's at odds with a extremely nutritious food supply. It's at odds with people wanting to be small, scrappy entrepreneurs that fit in with something that's innovative. It's at odds with the environment, you name it. It's at odds with all of that. And we should change that because collectively, our food policy has failed for decades, and it has been a large driving factor in helping to allow these multinational corporations to shift risks onto the farmer, the consumer, and the taxpayer. And that's really where a lot of that efficiency comes from, is the shift of those risks to somebody else. And they're really, really good at that. And that is one huge disadvantage that we fight as small scale processors and as regenerative ag, is that we have no means to shift those risks onto somebody else because we don't have a powerful lobby in Washington, D.C. that sits there and comes up with these crazy ideas of how are we going to guarantee a market for 46% of your corn that has no real net energy production, but we're going to put it in cars. How are we going to guarantee that you have half a dozen ways that basically guaranteed gambling, but you can get subsidized insurance on just about everything from your yield to your revenue per acre per whatever, and then you're going to think that somebody's going to compete renting or buying land against that. It's like, no, come on. This whole system is set up to perpetuate the system that we have. You watch now, it's starting to get a little bit of traction and a little bit of news. The avian influenza, as well as the euthanized animals at the beginning of the pandemic. We as taxpayers just paid billions to these companies to take away all of their risk. We didn't pay a dime to, and I'm not saying that I support the system, but all of those contract producers with those barns and everything go bankrupt in those systems when they don't have animals coming in, and the corporations get paid for the loss of their animals. The system is just corrupt.
Yeah.
It's totally corrupt.
Speaking of that, then what do you have in mind in terms of subsidy reform? What in best case scenario, what is the Gunthorp? Oh yeah, go ahead, Nate. Sorry.
I think that's a great question, but I think that it would help if we had just a little more maybe foundation behind, like, what are the policies? So like, how did this happen policy wise, the real short view, and how can we go from here? Because a lot of people, there's a lot of resistance, to using policy to get out of this. You hear it all the time. It's like, well, policy, like the government got us into this, the government can't get us out. Well, I think that's naive. I don't think there's a way out without policy personally. But how did policy get us here? How did the collaboration between policy and industry kind of get us to the point we're at now, and the short view? And then Ashley's question, I think building on that would kind of be the best story.
Yeah.
Really, really short version. He came out, an ag economist that came out of my alma mater, Purdue University, grew up not too far, less than an hour from here. Earl Buts was the Secretary of Agriculture. And, there was two camps at that point, this whole idea that farming was a lifestyle or farming was a business. And Earl Buts's mantra won out at the USDA. It was get big or get out. And it didn't work out for lots of farmers, where they leveraged the farm, bought more land, and then land prices crashed in the 80s, and we had the largest farm crisis imaginable. But USDA has always had that, they have the food assistance program, the SNAP and all that, I think it's actually the only reason that we even have a farm bill and a farm program, because that brings in the urban voters and the urban interest. And then you have the subsidy programs, both direct and indirect. And I'd argue it's the it's the CFAP programs, it's the direct payments to the corn, soybeans, cotton, all of the big commodities. But it's also the indirect. It's the 62% of the insurance subsidy program. So you can buy guaranteed revenue insurance, you can buy yield insurance, you can buy whether it's going to rain insurance. It's basically legalized gambling, that for every dollar you put in, the government guarantees you're going to get $2 back. So the bigger you are, the more you get to gamble, the more money that you get back long term. Yeah. And granted, it does come at the times when the farmers need it, and it's somewhat sensible. But none of the, it's only those program crops. It's mostly the things that go into those 60% of the calories that the American consumers eat. That's ultra processed food, high cost.
Like fundamentally, what do you think is the philosophical driver of that mindset? Subsidize these few monocrop, high calorie, like high caloric output, but poor quality food, like mindset. What do you think is philosophically happening there?
I've spent enough time in Washington, D.C. to understand that they really think that by subsidizing this, that they're guaranteeing that we have a food supply, and they're guaranteeing that we feed the world.
Right. They genuinely do think that.
They genuinely do believe that. I do think if there's one good thing that came out of COVID, I do think it's that we actually get to have those conversations now, that just producing empty calories and just out here making the I states look like a green desert is not necessarily the best for the environment, not necessarily the best for a resilient food supply, and it's not necessarily the best for human health. And so I think we're starting to have those conversations, but the back to Nate's point about government policy not fixing it, I've spent a lot of time on advocacy work, and I can understand that. But I also know that, changing government policy is like turning a freighter in the ocean. You have to push a long time to get the rudder to turn. And even after you get the rudder to turn, it takes a long time to turn that big ship around. And I think that, we put a lot of effort into it. And I think that, the first thing you have to do is convince them that there's actually a need for what you're asking for. And I think we're past that point. And I think COVID helped us a lot on that. They want to see small farmers. They want to see some sustainable regenerative agriculture. They want to see a better food supply. They want to see a resilient food supply. But it takes a lot of effort, because corporate ag is just pushing the whole time to continue this system that we have. And my argument is that we need the consumers, because the consumers actually need to buy the food that is raised, processed correctly. At the same time, that we need the government to not have policies to perpetuate this current system. So I think to just say that can let the government do what they're doing, the government's doing what it's doing, and we have what we have today because the government's doing what it's doing. So we have to get the government to change some. And
what changes specifically do you think, specifically policy wise, need to happen?
Specifically policy wise, we need 4 things if we want local and regional food. We need subsidy reform, and that's not only the direct payments, the indirect payments, but it's also the funds that the government is spending on government procurement. Those are all tilted towards the big guy. They either need to go away, or they need to be just as much tilted towards us. That's whichever side of the aisle or wherever you want to set, but that needs to change. We need antitrust enforcement. We need to understand as a society that live animals, perishable products, need some kind of protection from oligopolies and monopolies, because there's too much potential for abuse. If not, there's too much potential to just completely wipe out whole sectors of industry. And we need to realize that capitalism, while it's a great thing, capitalism needs some referees, or else that you no longer have opportunities for the small businesses and producers, and you no longer have choices for consumers. And we're getting dangerously to that point, not just in the United States, but globally in food. And we don't want to happen in food what happened in oil, and we're getting close to that point. So we need to take care of it here before we no longer have the potential to take care of it elsewhere. And then we need truth in labeling. The Federal Trade Commission, the USDA, they need to do their job. The U.S. is one of the worst in the whole world when it comes to greenwashing. Multinational corporations have co-opted virtually every viable niche that we've created, whether that's domestic grass-fed, whether that's the organic label, whether that's natural, whether that's gestation crate-free. all of those, you walk into the conventional grocery store, you can find product that has a fancy label from the multinational corporations. The ones that we're fighting against are the ones that are actually selling almost all of the niche product, with the only change coming from their marketing and labeling department. No legitimate changes out on the production side. Yeah. That has to end. And I have some hope that USDA started that process with the product of USA. I think you guys are both well aware. I'm not sure that your listeners are, but you can bring in foreign meat currently, as long as you put it in the package in the United States. You can call it product of USA. Yeah. That is so absolutely wrong. But that's just the tip of the iceberg on where we're wrong on truth in labeling. And one of the main cornerstones of a capitalistic competitive society is you have to have some ability to have transparency in the marketplace. Yeah. And then we need some inspection reform. And we need inspection reform both for the smallest producers and processors that want to be exempt from the system. So food sovereignty between consenting adults. And then we need some administrative law, some actually regulatory reform, so that the those that choose, like us, to operate in an inspected system, that we get our due process, that we get our First, our Fourth, and our 14th Amendment, that we have the right to challenge them, we have the right to due process, you know, all of the things that the Constitution guarantees that an administrative bureaucratic system tends to take away from the smallest. So true deregulation. The little guys actually get the chance to function with a government. The littlest of them, if they want to choose to opt out of it, get to actually opt out of it. That's what freedom and the American dream means to me. And if we legitimately, if we ask for those 4 things, we could fix those 4 things. And I think we could fix them in less than 10 years. I think we're started on them, actually.
Gunthorp for Secretary of Ag.
how do we convince, you know, like a Corn Belt senator of these? Because, you know, my experience up to this point is that, the politicians representing farm country are largely in the pockets of big ag. You know, it's these are great reforms that, I mean, this is great, and the industry uniformly opposes all of them, I'm certain. So
yeah, what are the levers of power? I was going to ask that question. Where do you see there are points where we could push? Not
only the industry opposes these things, the things that we're forced to pay into, the checkoffs, our trade associations, and the if you want to buy insurance in most of the rural areas, the Farm Bureau, which you're a member of, ends up opposing these things. My experience, and I think it's why lots of people say that to leave any hope for the government is futile. My experience has been that it takes decades of advocacy work before you build enough connections to the point that you get the opportunities to actually talk to the right people. I got to testify at the House Judiciary Committee, been on virtual meetings with the commissioners at the Federal Trade Commission, have met lawyers for antitrust at the DOJ, but I have good working relationships with some of those senators and congressmen in some of the I states. But I, started working with some of them when they were, representatives at state houses, not at the federal level. And then it takes years, and that's where I say it's that, and it takes more of us. We have to have, we have to be aggressive, but we have to be civil or somewhat reasonable. And I mean, it's and that's a fine line. I probably pushed the aggressive. I hound on them at times, and I think we got a hound on the bureaucrats too. I spend a fair amount of my time and resources helping some small processors where USDA Food Safety Inspection Service just flat out abuses their due process. And I am able to do that because of largely because of Congressman Massey. He's really, really good at standing up to USDA when they don't act in the manner that they're supposed to. We have a few true statesmen up in Washington, D.C., and I'd argue we have a few on both sides of the aisle that, you know, people can build connections with them. And if our government's out of control, they'll do everything in their power to try to put them back in control. But our system is really, really messed up in that those kind of people tend to not get elected very easily. Our system tends to just elect people that are really good at raising money. And
Yeah.
I don't know how I don't know how we fix that. I mean, campaign finance reform and all
Right.
that.
Who
But
are
I'm into that.
I wonder if you'd name some names, like who are the friends of regenerative agriculture? Who are the friends of food system reform
Our
that are out there right now?
you know, Congressman Massey for sure, Senator Lee, Rand Paul, our own senator in Indiana, Senator Braun. You know, you go to the other side of the aisle, you got Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, Booker. We have quite a few that, you know, Senator Markey, Congresswoman Adams, Congresswoman Jayapal. I mean, there's a long list. And like I said, the list got a lot longer after COVID. And the list for me, for people that have valuable discussions with, got a lot longer after I testified at the House Judiciary Committee. But, you know, when we lay out our message and people actually get a chance to listen to it, or people come out to the farm and see it, it's really a difficult message for people to just say, oh, that Greg's crazy, because the message actually makes sense.
Right.
I mean, how do you argue with that? We need a resilient agriculture. We still need an agriculture that, you know, fits in our communities and produces food, does it in a manner that, you know, doesn't smell up the whole communities, doesn't pollute the waterways, produces the most nutrient dense food possible. And then you actually show them that, hey, we're doing this, and we're doing it at a scale that we've sold as much as 1 million pounds of meat and poultry in a year. So this is not some wild pie in the sky idea. We actually do it. And, you know, you tell them that for enough years and they're like, hey, you guys said this can't be done. I just talked to Greg. He said he's doing it. What's wrong with you people? You know? So, I mean, you know, because don't get me wrong, we go in and talk to them, and as soon as they close the door, the Farm Bureau or the National Cattlemen's Beef Association or whatever, they're coming in the door saying, oh, don't listen to Greg. He's a nutcase, you know, but, you know, they've seen it, so they can't 100% think I'm completely, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a nutcase at times, but not completely. So,
you know, I'm curious, before we wrap up here, you know, you mentioned a minute ago, like we talked about policy and, you know, how like it just tilts the playing field. But the other part is, you know, is consumers. You know, you have to be able to sell the products that we're growing, you know, regeneratively, that we're farming differently. You have to be able to sell those. And so part of that's, you know, reaching consumers, marketing, consumer education, things like that. And I'm curious what you would say to, say, like a, you know, a consumer who might, you know, say something like, you know, food, you know, I just, you know, it's just got to be as cheap as possible. All this, you know, regenerative stuff is kind of just sort of yuppie elitist stuff. And you know, why should consumers pay more? I mean, you know, like how it, we just need to think about the bottom line and just need to, we just need food to be as cheap as possible.
you know, we're just finally starting to make the connections between how food is raised and how the health of our whole society. You know, we on our farms have no problem, you know, correlating what our diet is for our animals to the overall health of our flock. Our society's finally starting to come to that realization. You know, I tell people It's only been about the last 20 years that we even realized, that science even realized that stress had an impact on our health. But you look at our healthcare costs in the United States. We have a healthcare system that neither individuals, businesses, or the government can afford. And a large driving factor in why we can't afford that is that over 60% of the calories in the average American diet is ultra processed food. It's refined carbohydrates. We have 100 million people in this country that are pre-diabetics because of our food supply. And if you took the USDA food pyramid and you flipped it upside down, you could legitimately label it on the top of it, the food subsidy pyramid. Yeah. We 100% subsidize the wrong things, empty calories, entirely the wrong empty calories. And as a society, we have the cheapest food as a percentage of our income in the world, but we have the highest healthcare costs. And those two, there's not just correlation, there's causation there. We need to feed people better, and we need to start with producing nutrient-dense food and start throwing out some of these empty refined carbohydrates. So regenerative agriculture plays a huge, huge part in a huge role in fixing our food supply. And don't get me wrong, part of your question is very, very legitimate there. When you raise animals where you're not able to, have hidden costs that you've shifted to someone else, when you process things at small scale by hand, humanely, without all of that, millions of dollars worth of automation, and you deliver it to people at small scale without those huge elaborate distribution systems, food costs more. There's no doubt about it. But there's a lot of people in this society that could afford to choose food that was better for them rather than a huge, huge healthcare bill. And our government could choose to purchase some food that was better for everyone, rather than the lowest level of food in our country is not commodity food in our country. The lowest level of food in our country is the government procurement food that's even a level below the quality of commodity. And that's wrong. We shouldn't be feeding our young kids, our elderly, and our military the lowest quality food in the country. That's an ethical issue, and that's just flat out wrong.
To end up, I'm wondering if you can talk through the listener. What can they do to find legit regenerative producers to purchase from, to get involved politically at all, to just pay attention to the debate? What as a regular person, what are they? What can they do to get involved to shift this forward in a positive way?
As a regular consumer, I would challenge you to do one of two things, or actually probably both of them. Buy all the food that you can directly from a farmer, so that you can ask them questions, so that you can go out and look at their farm. There's a few exceptions, but in general, almost all of the stuff at the grocery stores is greenwashed and is not at the level of regenerative that you could buy directly from a farmer. And the second thing, do some homework, do some research. If you're at the grocery store, take down that name. Nowadays, it's not that difficult to find out whether that certification on that has any actual meaning or not. It's also not that difficult to go on to Google Earth. And like I said before, you don't have to be a certifier for some kind of regenerative label to be able to look on Google Earth and tell whether you think that person is a regenerative operation or whether it's some factory in the city. And if they're not willing to show you the farm, or tell you the address of where the stuff's coming from, there's probably a reason. So, nowadays we have the tools if you actually want to figure out what kind of food you're actually putting in your body. So that's the first step. The second step is that I think whichever side of the political aisle that you end up being on, I think you got to stay engaged with your representatives, with your senators. I'd argue that we need to make sure that we keep pointing out to them that we have some regulatory agencies that, regardless of who is in charge, we need politically unbiased people in them. And right now, I'd give some couple really, really good examples where one of them has been there from before this administration and gets virtually 100% approval. Probably won't continue because he's probably made some big companies upset. But the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Rohit Chopra, that's an excellent example of somebody that, regardless of political party, he's actually believes in the whole idea that we need safeguards, but that small businesses need some exemptions. That's the kind of people we need in charge of agencies. The Federal Trade Commission with Lena Khan's the same way now. I'd even argue that USDA Food Safety Inspection Service, Paul Kicker, the current administrator, much better choice than the last one that ended up taking a job at JBS for $5 million after he retired. That we need to root out those kind of corruption, and we need to put unbiased people, and we need more people telling them, because our Congress and senators don't just do it. We have 4 levels of government now, and we need to really, really make sure that they're keeping an eye on that 4th level, the bureaucracy, that Congress is doing its job of policing them. And if we had more people telling them all that. And then I have a Facebook page that we like to talk about politics on. It's called Politics from the Pastures. Join it. Love to talk about any issue, regardless of your political persuasion. I actually believe that there's a strong need for a progressive and a fiscally responsible parties in this United States. And I think that we need all people to be able to have these civil but yet complicated discussions, because it's a lot more nuanced than just yes or no on all of this stuff. And I just ask people, get involved, because we can take this country back. And I do not jokingly at all say that I think that we start taking this country back by changing the food supply and making rural America vibrant again. That's where it's got to start. It really does.
I love it.
Woohoo.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This is a wonderful conversation. Both of us have followed your work for a while, so we're gonna try to find a time to come see your operation. It would be super great.
Yeah, I'd love to visit.
Love to have you visit.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.